just wow. Well, the Xbox July show has come and gone, and boy did it leave us with a ton to talk about. We got a beautiful CG trailer, some exciting gameplay, and a ton of articles diving into details most fans could want from a reveal like this. So let's dive in, break it all down. First, as was revealed in the Waypoint blog post that went live just after the reveal, flights will happen relatively soon, but no dates or timeframes are given, other than that flighting will continue beyond the game's launch as new features, new content are released, presumably. Anyway, let's dive into the new trailers, starting with the CG trailer titled Step Inside. We open with this massive facility over an unknown planet. The planet is visibly being mined, and the facility, simply labeled UNSC-25, is bringing up materials via a space elevator. Inside, we can see the materials being melted down and forged into Mjolnir armor. All the while, we get this wonderful narration from Dr. Halsey about Mjolnir, how it will save humanity in the war to come, but requires someone to use it. From the perspective of the trailer, this is in reference to the player. In universe, though, this speech likely isn't taking place at the time the armor is being assembled, the armor being assembled being Gen 3, being made for Master Chief, whereas the audio sounds like it's a younger Dr. Halsey and referencing the completion of Mjolnir as a whole, not the latest generation or iteration. The trailer doesn't have many other details to break down, but on a personal note, it's fantastic to see Mjolnir being assembled like this. I love the individual plates being forged, sound being used to blast away the scale, and then being smoothed with a blade on a microscopic level. The hand coming out of the liquid does bother me a bit, as it kind of gives the impression that the undersuit or tech suit is simply rubber, but maybe this is meant to be the creation of the liquid crystal layer, which is actually directly referenced later on. I'm not sure. Whatever the case, I love seeing the armor come together, the 117 being welded on, the helmet being lowered, all of it. It is kind of weird how the armor seems to be assembled in 0G, but then we have water falling on it at the same time, but whatever. And just so that nobody calls me out for not mentioning it, we also get to see the grappling hook, or the grapple shot. God, what a terrible name. Being assembled. I swear to God, I'm just calling it the grapple. I refuse to call it the grapple shot again. Ugh. Anyway, the trailer comes to a close with another Mjolnir boot-up screen, which, as has been pointed out in recent days, has one small difference from the screen in the 2019 trailer. The date that Dr. Halsey modified the suit's BIOS is now shown as September 19th, 2559, 2 years earlier than previous. That's also just a month before Halo Shadows of Reach is set. I don't know if last year's date was intentionally misleading or if something changed since then, but as you'll soon see, Halo Infinite seems to be set in 2560 now. Otherwise, the information that flashed by is the same as last year. With that though, we can dive into the actual gameplay footage. After showing us what seems to be the menu, we dive into the demo, set on May 28th, 2560, 167 days after we lost. So right away we have a couple interesting details. First, the date, May 28th, 2560, is 1 day after the date we saw on the Pelican screen in the E3 2018 trailer. I don't know if that's significant or not, but it's interesting. Second, 167 days after we lost. We can recall from the 2019 trailer, the pilot talking about how the UNSC lost everything. Seems that loss happened on or around December 13th, 2559, just 2-ish months after Shadows of Reach is set. That was already going to be an interesting book, but damn. Continuing, we hear the pilot from last year now talking about how shit the situation is as he and Chief are shot at by the new banished AA turrets we recently saw revealed by Mega Constructs. The Pelican somehow takes 2 direct hits and isn't destroyed, instead being forced to make an emergency landing. I'm sorry, but what kind of threat are the banished really if their AA guns seemingly aren't powerful enough to take out a single Pelican? Had the pilot dodged the shots, that'd be another story, but this is a bit much. Especially when we go back to Halo 3 and see a longsword, of all things, being shot down by a single Mantis AA gun. Come on. Anyway, after the crash, the pilot is awoken by the Chief, who stays very mission-focused and talks about the AA guns, while the pilot, angry at the situation, talks about how some nearby crashed Condors might have a usable slipspace drive. After a bit of back and forth, we jump into the mission seamlessly. So first, I love the banter between the Chief and pilot, and I look forward to more of that. I hope to see some of it during gameplay and not just in cutscenes though. Second, I love how seamless the transition from cutscene to gameplay was. It reminds me a lot of ODST, which is probably the game that did it the best out of the series. Third, something interesting I noticed was that there wasn't any visible cuts. The game seems to have one continuous shot, a lot like the recent God of War game. There was a leak a while back that hinted at this, and it seems like it may have been accurate, at least thus far. Once out in the world, we see the new HUD come up, along with 3 objectives, one for each AA gun, very reminiscent of Halo CE, at least in the fact that you have 3 objectives. We can also see the Chief's current loadout along the bottom, an MA-40 and an unknown pistol, plus the grappling hook. Out in the environment, we can see banished watchtowers, the banished outpost in the distance, and wildlife all around. The ring really feels alive, and the art direction is absolutely breathtaking. You really get a feel for the scale of this ring, and more so than ever, it feels like I can explore here, to say nothing of what's actually available to do. The Chief soon engages with some grunts, which we can see have a mix of the Halo 4 and Halo 5 designs, like we saw with the New York Toy Fair. Armor-wise, they have a mix of designs with a classic Grunt Minor and the Grunt Imperial armor from Halo 4 and 5, both making appearances. I love this mix of designs. During this, we get our first sense of sound design, with much of what we hear from Halo 5 seemingly being brought over. The plasma pistol shots sound a lot like Halo 5, the guns sound like Halo 5, there's even a red X where enemies die, which is more visual, but you get my point. Hit markers are also in, much to my delight. At the end of the fight, the Chief's shields recharge, and we can hear, I'm happy to say, the classic shield recharge sound. What's rather cool too is that when shields are lost, a health bar becomes visible, so visible health isn't gone, something I was kind of concerned about. I loved that in Halo 5, and I'm glad that that's returning. Sadly, it's not all good news, as the new visual for shields recharging with a ton of yellow hexagons appearing on your screen like the shields are rebuilding, just being distracting and I dare say unnecessary. This is over-designed. We next see a crashed UNSC ship, though I couldn't tell you what class it is. I looked through a bunch of them, I think this might be something new. Among the debris is also a crashed Pelican, and overhead is the source of major disappointment for me, a banished Phantom. Let me explain. This Phantom's design was pulled straight from Halo Wars 2 in the worst way, in that it retains the blocky look of the RTS model. Now that sort of design is fine for an RTS when you're fairly far away from objects and they have to have exaggerated details to make them stand out. However, when bringing it over to a shooter, new design considerations need to be made. I see this and it looks like a Mega Construx set flying through the sky. No, scratch that, a Mega Construx version would probably look better. Seriously, it's kind of futile, but I hope they can overhaul the Phantom's design before the final game is released. I mean, there's probably bigger concerns, but this just looks terrible, man. Moving on, the Chief grabs a Warthog and heads towards the banished camp, and despite my rant just a moment ago, I am loving the Warthog here. I always loved this design, the sound is great, and it looks like it handles like a dream. During this, the Chief pulls up a menu, and we get some confirmation on a few key features, much of which is supplemented by articles IGN released right after the gameplay reveal. From those articles, we know this section of the game is, quote, several hours into the campaign, according to Chris Lee, studio head for Halo Infinite. That's encouraging of a large, long campaign. Along with that, you can see that the Halo ring is basically open world, allowing for a ton of exploration potential. You can select objectives, view missions, zoom in and out. It's very reminiscent of ODST and general open world games. Now, I think I've made it clear at this point that I didn't want a true open world Halo, but just large environments that we can explore mission to mission. To quote Chris Lee via IGN again, there's definitely a sense of freedom that you haven't had before in Halo. You will get to choose your path there. But we also want to tell that story, so while you're doing that, we want to keep the story moving forward, versus like a non-linear story or something like that. So this sounds like the middle ground I've been spouting, but we'll ultimately have to wait and see. Taking another look at the map though, when it's loaded up, if you pause at just the right moment, you can see a ton of additional icons and information. We can see Echo and Gulf Base, which I would guess are UNSC outposts of some kind. The pilot's Pelican is Echo 216, so I'm curious if there's a connection with it and Echo Base. We can also see locations like Conservatory, the Tower, and Green Spire. There's what I'm guessing is a kill mission for someone named Okro Vagadoon, which is most likely an elite given the apostrophe before his last name. and a marker that reads Marine Rescue K. I'll be curious what these missions are, what the purpose of the bases are, etc. So far though, I'm liking what we see. Going back to our main objective though, there's some other interesting things we can see. When an objective is selected, it has a difficulty and some kind of star rating or points or something, I don't know. When I saw this, I was wondering if difficulty might be selected on a per mission basis rather than from a menu, or maybe the difficulty is variable, but according to 343, you'll still select a difficulty at a main menu like traditional Halo. Still, I gotta wonder, at the very least, what do the numbers mean, Mason? When selecting the mission, the yellow icon, you can additionally see what look like collectibles of some kind and a mission description. Along the top, we can see two additional menu options, upgrades, which will be interesting to see how that plays out, and the thing that got me super excited, a database. So yeah, codex confirmed for Halo Infinite, baby. Moving on, Chief moves towards the Banished camp, making an absolutely sweet jump, and running over some enemies. Upon arrival, we get our first in-game look at the new elites as one combat rolls to dodge fire. As the Chief moves in to melee the elite, sprinting towards him by the way, we can pause to get a close-up of this elite, where we can see that the armor design is much simpler, and the biology seems to be in line with H2A, but not exactly identical. I'll be interested to see all that in more detail down the line. In the background, if we pause after the elite is killed, we can see a plasma pistol, plasma grenades, a needler, and a new carbine-looking weapon, which we'll talk about a little bit later. From there, the Chief grabs a new human weapon, the VK-78 Commando. So we can see that at least human weapons will be identified by their full designation, and under that we can see additional information on each weapon, which is certainly useful for new players and knowing what each weapon does. What's also interesting is when the AR is dropped, we can see the full name, but no additional information when the option to pick it up is presented. This is also the case earlier when the Chief kills a grunt, it presents the option to pick up the plasma pistol, but no additional information. What's kind of confusing though is that later on, the Chief runs past a plasma pistol and that additional information is listed below its name. So I'm not sure what the parameters for picking this stuff up are. Getting back to it though, I have to say I'm not the biggest fan of this new gun, the Commando. It doesn't really look like something I would expect to see from Halo, and I generally think 343 have done a good job of making guns that feel like they're at home in Halo, even if the designs aren't always the greatest. This Commando, though, feels like it's something I'd expect to see in Destiny or even a modern military shooter. That said, the way it shoots and sounds is pretty good. After mowing down some grunts, the Chief is soon confronted by a pair of banished brutes in full gear as they drop from the sky. This was a cool moment that quickly became a little confusing. Why are these brutes, who totally look like Red Legion Cabal from Destiny by the way, being dropped in on flaming drop pods which later explode, with no weapons? Just seems like it's trying to be cool while ignoring any sort of logic, which I'm never a fan of. And of course, if we pause at the right moment, we can see everyone's new favorite meme, Craig. While funny, the blank expression here is a bit discouraging. I hope this is something that can be fixed before launch. Further, we can clearly see that these brutes are largely hairless, something I am not a fan of. Perhaps worse though, they lack any visible teeth. This is something 343 started to do with brutes in Halo Wars 2, and I'm really not a fan. I miss the jutting visible fangs/teeth they had in the Bungie games and even in Halo 2 Anniversary. Now, without that, without all the hair, without the visible fangs, they really look like gorillas now. And yes, that was an issue for me in Halo Wars 2 as well. Moving on though, the Chief grabs a new piece of equipment, a drop wall from a stack of UNSC gear. So the Banished seem to be gathering that up, or maybe this was once a UNSC outpost, I don't know. We can also see there's an option to pick up fusion coil, keep that in mind as we go on, and we can see spike grenades, which we can see later have a rather long delay on detonation compared to their Halo 3 counterparts. Confronted by another banished brute, the Chief deploys his drop wall, which we can see as a one-way energy barrier blocking incoming fire but allowing Chief to fire through it. We then get to see one of the coolest features in Halo Infinite using the grapple hook in combat. Chief grapples onto the brute, pulling himself in and sticking him. I'll admit I'm a little weirded out by the Chief is pulled towards the enemy rather than the other way around, or them both being pulled together, especially since this happens later on with a notably lighter enemy, but otherwise it's pretty damn cool. From a lore perspective though, I can't help but wonder if thrusters are still in and that's what's propelling the Chief towards his target, because the physics otherwise really kind of bother me. Interestingly though, after this grapple move, we can see that the grapple has a cooldown period. So there's that. Another cool feature is that the Brute is jumping into the air. I speculated a little while ago about jump packs potentially coming back, and it seems they are, at least in some manner. During these encounters though, you may have noticed two things. As previously discussed, the Chief is sprinting, though it seems to be very slow. But two, he actually seems to combat slide at some point. So some form of that is returning. Finishing with the Brute, the Chief grabs another new weapon, the Ravager, which fires bursts of plasma. We also get to see the Magnum at this point. The Chief activates a lift up to the AA gun, and we get this beautiful vista shot of the ring. At this point in particular, we can really see just how damaged the ring is. I wonder if it'll start coming together as the game goes on. At the top of the lift, the Chief has to take out more Banished, starting with a classic Rutian Jackal with the longest neck in history. Joking aside, there are several interesting moments during this encounter though. For one, we see a Brute toss a suicide grunt at the Chief saying, "Die for the Banished!" We also get to see a new Brute armor design, this one more akin to Halo 3 or even slightly Halo Reach style armor. It's going to be very interesting to see how ranks are handled in this game, as we have so many Covenant species in armor that's more traditionally Covenant, yet they're working for the Banished. When we saw a lot of this stuff with Mega Constructs, I had hoped that it meant that multiple Covenant factions would be in, but that doesn't seem to be the case, sadly. Finally though, we see some more new weapons. The Pulse Carbine, which seems to be a middle ground between the Storm Rifle and the Covenant Carbine, and the Mangler, the new pistol that we've been seeing in the Mega Construct set, which seems to be a spiritual successor to the Mauler. The Chief then activates some kind of visual mode where we can see this yellow pulse across the environment, eventually highlighting something in the next area. Not much else to say there because I can't really tell what it's highlighting. Grappling up to said area, fucking sweet by the way, the Chief takes out more Banished and we see a few more interesting things. First, the grunts actually reach behind them to grab a grenade. It's a small detail, but a really cool one. Enemies are actually animated reaching for a grenade in a realistic manner. Second, the Chief uses the grapple to pull a fusion coil towards him and then throws it at a turret emplacement. How sick is that? Third, he picks up a new weapon, the CQS-48 Bulldog, the new shotgun with a cylinder magazine. According to IGN, this is a 12-gauge UNSC riot gun and reportedly taking the place of the traditional 8-gauge shotgun of past games. This is coming from IGN rather than 343 directly, so I'm wondering if there was a misunderstanding on their part, because I don't want to see the other shotgun out. Fourth, there is plenty of blood when killing the Covenant, so there you go, folks. With the enemies disposed of, the Chief moves up the lift to deactivate the AA gun, only to be trapped and confronted by the leader of the Banished on this ring, Escharum. And I gotta say, I am absolutely in love with this guy. He plays up the Chief in a way we've never seen in a Halo game, talking about how despite the victory over the UNSC, he grows weary without a challenge, and he can't wait to fight the Chief. I can't wait to confront this guy. He's got me excited. But that's not all we get here. There are several clips during this speech with some interesting potential information. Escharum talks about how the UNSC lost this war months ago, which we kind of already knew at this point. We see the scene of the pilot looking over a landscape in despair. What looks like a Pelican crashed in the background, so maybe Echo 216 gets destroyed at one point. We then get to the scene within the Pelican, a huge holographic display with a ton of UNSC personnel floating around, then all marked deceased. I don't know if this means the Infinity gets destroyed since they're all said to serve with the Infinity, or if it's just a bunch of personnel from Infinity all getting killed at one point. I hope it's the latter. I like the Infinity, I don't want to see it destroyed. Maybe crippled temporarily, but not destroyed. There's actually a cool theory out there that the big break we see in the ring last year might actually be from Infinity ramming into the ring to stop it from being used or something. That would be pretty cool. What's also rather cool is that in this scene, we can see all this information on each UNSC service member, such as location, blood type, rank, and notably what organization they work for. The standout here is that we can see the ODST symbol. So hopefully this isn't just a tease, and we might actually see some ODSTs in Halo Infinite. Interestingly though, we actually don't see any Spartans among the dead, so yeah. Escharum goes on to say that the ring is already under the control and that soon the auditorium will be as well. So now we gotta ask, what is the auditorium? Good question. One idea I've had is that it might be this structure here, as this appears in a lot of key art for Halo Infinite, but given that it's on the ring, I'm starting to doubt that. I feel like the auditorium is likely another structure elsewhere in the galaxy, but maybe nearby where this ring is? Who knows? We next see the Chief and Pilot looking at a hologram of the broken ring, the Pilot explaining something, and finally we hear Escharum name drop a new enemy, the Harbinger, saying that this Harbinger shares the banished goals to honor the will of Atriox. So now we have to wonder, who or what is the Harbinger? Now, a lot of people have jumped on the idea that it might be Cortana, but I'm highly skeptical of this. I feel like if Cortana needed forces under her command, there are much more willing factions out there that wouldn't need such a theatrical ploy. And there's no reason for Cortana to seek out the Banished in particular. They aren't the most powerful group out there. People seem to think the Banished have this significant power, but they really aren't that big. They know how to use hit-and-run tactics to their advantage so they can take on more powerful enemies with a smaller force. But a galaxy-threatening power they are not. Or at least, they weren't. Whatever this Harbinger is, I think that elevated them to a threat much more significant than they've ever been. And that just does not feel like something Cortana would do. Another idea that people have had is that this Harbinger might be the Didact, which I could certainly see and might even be on board with. I'm not entirely sure yet. Still, I think the Harbinger might be something entirely new. At the very least, I'm not ready to say whether it's an individual or a group. I know Harbinger is traditionally a singular word, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's how it's being used in this context, so who knows. That pretty much wraps up the gameplay demo, but not everything we have to break down today. Released just after the show was a gameplay trailer with a few extra tidbits of information. First, it contains some extra dialogue from Escharum, which I absolutely love because I love everything he says. Incidentally, he's played by Darren DePaul, probably best known as Samuel Hayden from Doom and Reinhardt from Overwatch, but interestingly also played Let Valier in Halo Wars 2 among so many other roles. During this, we see a couple returning weapons, the energy sword and the battle rifle. We also see what looks like an elite major, his armor at least partially inspired by the Halo Reach officer harness. We also see a Brute using the VK-78 Commando, so we get to see Brutes using human weapons. We then see a new grenade type, what seems to be a stun grenade. When I saw this, I immediately thought back to that new gun we've been seeing with the Mega Construct sets, that on the cover is depicted as shooting electricity or lightning. I kinda joked about it being a lightning gun, but now after seeing this, I can't help but wonder if that's what it's actually going to be. And at the very end, we actually get to see some Marines and a Warthog. Lastly, one thing I know y'all will rip into me over if I don't mention is a certain scene here with Chief staring at 3 lights in a triangular shape. Many have wondered if this might be mendicant bias, given his most common depiction. Sadly, I don't think that this is mendicant, but just 3 lights. This is clearly from a cutscene, and while I think mendicant might be mentioned in Infinite, I don't think his role will be prominent enough to be featured in a cutscene. I'd love to be proven wrong, but at the moment that's where I stand. Well, that should cover all the new footage we saw yesterday in detail. We'll talk more about specific things in the days to come, but for now, here's what we have. Was there anything I missed? Any observation you disagree or agree with? What has you the most hyped for Halo Infinite? Let me know in the comments below. For now, this has been Halo Canon, and I'll see y'all next time.
This is my last fight. A true test of legends. Our story will outlive us both. Set a fire in your heart, Spartan. Bare your fangs. Fight hard. Die well.
Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing, and if you really love me, hit that notification bell and leave a thumbs up. These both really help out the channel. I wouldn't be where I am now without your views and support, so once again, thank you. Keep on being awesome, Canonites.